Moving into the old building in the heart of the city felt like stepping back in time. Its towering, weathered facade loomed over the narrow streets, casting long shadows that seemed to whisper secrets from a bygone era. The building had a storied history, I'd been told, once a grand hotel before being converted into apartments. Now, it stood as a relic, its grandeur faded but not entirely lost. As I walked through the entrance, the creak of the heavy wooden door echoed through the cold, silent hallways. The air inside was stale, carrying a faint scent of mildew and age. Dim lighting flickered intermittently, casting eerie shadows on the peeling wallpaper. The atmosphere was thick with an inexplicable sense of unease, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something or someone. Despite the building's eerie ambience, I couldn't shake off the excitement bubbling within me. This was my first apartment, a place of my own in the city. I'd spent years saving up for this moment, and now it was finally here. As I climbed the grand, spiral staircase to the third floor, I tried to focus on the positives, the high ceilings, the intricate moldings, and the charmingly vintage details that gave the building its character. Yet, with every step, that subtle feeling of dread grew stronger. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional distant sound of other tenants moving about their apartments. When I finally reached my door, I hesitated for a moment, key in hand, a chill running down my spine. Shaking off the feeling, I turned the key and pushed open the door. Inside, the apartment was a mix of dusty old furniture and beautiful, forgotten relics. The large windows let in the last light of the day, casting long shadows across the wooden floors. I set my bags down and took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. This was my new home, and I was determined to make it my own, despite the strange, unsettling energy that seemed to cling to the very walls. As I started to unpack, I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. It was an irrational thought, I knew, but the feeling persisted. I shrugged it off, attributing it to first-day jitters and the overwhelming experience of moving. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of the unsettling events that would soon unfold, making me question everything I thought I knew about this old building and its history. It was during my second week in the apartment that I found the mirror. Tucked away in a dusty corner of the bedroom, partially covered by an old sheet, it was as if it had been deliberately hidden. Curious, I pulled back the cloth to reveal an antique mirror with a beautifully ornate golden frame. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the kind you don't see anymore, with intricate carvings of vines and flowers that seemed to tell a story of their own. I decided to hang the mirror in the living room, thinking it would make a stunning centerpiece. It was heavy and solid, clearly an heirloom piece left behind by the previous tenant. As I stepped back to admire it, I felt a small thrill of excitement. The mirror added a touch of elegance to the otherwise bare room, reflecting the soft, warm light from the lamp and making the space feel more welcoming. For the first few days, the mirror was nothing more than a beautiful addition to my home. I often found myself glancing at it, admiring the way it seemed to capture and hold the light. But then, the strange reflections began. It started subtly. One evening, as I was reading on the couch, I caught a glimpse of movement in the mirror out of the corner of my eye. When I looked directly at it, there was nothing unusual, just my own reflection staring back at me. I shrugged it off, convincing myself it was just a trick of the light or perhaps a fleeting shadow from outside. But the incidents became more frequent. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I saw a figure in the mirror behind me. It was a woman in an old-fashioned dress, her face pale and eyes hollow. I spun around, heart pounding, but there was no one there. When I looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone. I tried to rationalize what I had seen. Maybe it was my imagination, fueled by the spooky atmosphere of the old building. Yet, The reflections grew more vivid and disturbing. I saw scenes that didn't belong in my apartment, flickers of the past, glimpses of people, and places that seemed foreign yet eerily familiar. There was the man in a dark suit, standing by the window, looking out with a somber expression. There were children playing in what appeared to be the same room, but from a different era, their laughter faint and ghostly. Each time, the scenes would vanish as soon as I focused on them, leaving me questioning my sanity. I began to feel uneasy in my own home, the mirror's presence becoming more oppressive with each passing day. The beautiful golden frame now seemed like a gilded cage, trapping not just reflections, but memories and spirits from another time. My once cozy apartment now felt like a haunted relic, with the mirror at the center of its dark secrets. As the days turned into weeks, the unsettling occurrences with the mirror grew more frequent and far more disturbing. What began as fleeting images of people and places soon escalated into harrowing scenes of violence and tragedy. I often found myself unable to look away, even though the fear gnawed at my very core. One night, as I sat on the couch, the mirror's reflection twisted into a nightmarish vision. I saw a man and woman arguing fiercely in what appeared to be my living room, though the decor was from another era. The argument escalated, and the man struck the woman, sending her sprawling to the floor. Blood pooled around her head, and her eyes stared lifelessly at me through the glass. I screamed and turned away, my heart racing, but the image lingered in my mind, more vivid than any dream. These horrific visions became a nightly occurrence. Each time, the scenes varied but were always brutal and tragic. Fires consuming the building, figures leaping from windows in desperation, shadows dragging lifeless bodies into the darkness. My once cozy apartment had become a theater of horrors, and I was a captive audience. The mirror wasn't the only source of terror. Other objects in the apartment seemed to awaken, each with its own sinister presence. The rocking chair in the corner of the living room, which I had found charmingly antique, began to move on its own. At first, it was subtle, a gentle sway as if moved by a breeze. But soon, it rocked violently, creaking ominously in the dead of night, even when the windows were closed and the air was still. Then there was the pocket watch. I had discovered it in a drawer, a beautifully crafted piece with intricate engravings. However, it always stopped at the same time, 3:15 a.m. No matter how many times I wound it, the hands would freeze, marking the hour with an unsettling finality. I couldn't help but wonder what had happened at that exact moment. Desperation drove me to seek answers from my neighbors. I knocked on doors, hesitant but determined to find someone who might share my experiences. To my relief and horror, I found that I was not alone. The elderly woman in 2B spoke of a portrait that watched her every move, its eyes following her around the room. The young couple in 3C mentioned a phonograph that played eerie, disjointed music in the middle of the night, despite having no record on it. Each tenant had their own tale of haunted relics, items that seemed to carry a dark history of the building within them. We shared our stories in hushed voices, fear and understanding binding us together. The building, once a grand hotel, had a past stained with tragedy. Fires, suicides, murders, each story seemed to be imprinted on the objects within its walls. The sense of unease that had initially seemed like mere paranoia was now validated by our collective experiences. Our conversations often ended with a chilling realization. We were living among the remnants of the past, and those remnants were not content to remain silent. The building, with its haunted objects, had become a nexus of supernatural activity, each day pushing us closer to the edge of terror and madness. The escalating terror in my apartment left me with no choice but to seek answers. Driven by fear and a burning need to understand the malevolent forces at play, I began to investigate the origins of the haunted objects. My first step was to visit the local library, hoping to find any historical records or articles about the building and its past. Hours of poring over dusty tomes and yellowed newspapers yielded intriguing, but incomplete clues. The building had indeed been a grand hotel in its heyday, but its glory was overshadowed by a series of tragic events, mysterious deaths, suicides, and a devastating fire that claimed many lives. Each tragedy seemed to leave a dark imprint on the objects within the building, but I needed more concrete information. One evening, while combing through an old directory, I stumbled upon a mention of a nearby antiquary that specialized in rare and unique items. The shop, named Eldritch Curiosities, was known for its collection of antiquities, but its owners had vanished without a trace years ago, leaving behind a cloud of mystery. The name sent a shiver down my spine, but it was a lead I couldn't ignore. Determined to uncover the truth, I tracked down the location of Eldritch Curiosities. The shop was long abandoned, its once grand facade now decaying and overgrown with ivy. Inside, the shelves were covered in dust, and the air was thick with the scent of mildew. As I carefully explored the shop, I found records and ledgers that detailed the acquisition and sale of numerous items, all of which seemed to have ended up in my building. I discovered that the owners, a reclusive couple named Edmund and Lillian Hawthorne, were rumored to dabble in the occult. Their disappearance only added to the sinister reputation of the shop. Stories circulated about curses and hexes placed on the items they sold, and there were whispers of dark rituals conducted within the shop's walls. Digging deeper into the Hawthorne's background, I found old newspaper clippings and journal entries that painted a chilling picture. They believed that certain objects could act as conduits for restless spirits, portals for lost souls seeking to escape their torment. The items in their shop were said to be gateways to another dimension, where the boundaries between the living and the dead blurred. The mirror, the rocking chair, the pocket watch, they were all linked to the Hawthornes and their malevolent practices. Each object had a history of tragedy and death, and each was a vessel for the dark energies that lingered in the building. The more I uncovered, the more I realized the true extent of the danger I was in. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. The visions in the mirror, the moving chair, the stopped watch, all were manifestations of the spirits trapped within these objects, bound by the curses placed upon them by the Hawthornes. These were not mere hauntings, they were deliberate, calculated acts of malice designed to torment and ensnare the living. Armed with this knowledge, I knew I had to find a way to break the curses and free the spirits trapped within the objects. The building, with its haunted relics, was a prison for lost souls, and I was determined to find a way to release them and put an end to the cycle of terror. But I also knew that confronting such powerful and ancient forces would come with great risk, and the path ahead was fraught with danger. The supernatural events in my apartment reached a terrifying crescendo one stormy night. The air was thick with electricity, and the atmosphere seemed to hum with an otherworldly energy. I was alone in my living room, the mirror casting eerie reflections in the dim light. Suddenly, the temperature plummeted, and a cold, oppressive presence filled the room. The mirror began to shimmer, and the figure of the woman I had seen before emerged from its depths. Her pale face was twisted in anguish, eyes wide with a silent scream. As she stepped out of the mirror, her form became more solid, and the room filled with the scent of decay and rot. My heart pounded in my chest, and I was paralyzed with fear. The woman reached out towards me, her hand cold and clammy. Her touch sent a shock of terror through my body, and I stumbled backward, knocking over the rocking chair. It began to rock violently on its own, the creaking sound echoing through the apartment. The pocket watch in my hand stopped precisely at 3:15 a.m., its ticking silenced forever. Desperate to escape, I ran to the door, but it slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. The woman's voice filled the room, a mournful wail that seemed to come from the depths of the underworld. "Help us," she pleaded, her voice echoing in my mind. "Free us from this torment." I realized then that fleeing would do no good. The spirits were bound to the objects, and leaving the apartment wouldn't stop the hauntings. I had to confront the source of their suffering and find a way to break the curses. Summoning all my courage, I faced the woman and nodded, signaling my willingness to help. With a deep breath, I grabbed the mirror and turned it towards the rocking chair and the pocket watch. The room filled with a blinding light, and the figures of other trapped souls appeared, their faces etched with pain and sorrow. I began to chant the incantation I had found in the Hawthorne's journals, a ritual meant to cleanse the objects and release the spirits. As I spoke the final words, the mirror shattered, sending shards of glass flying through the air. The rocking chair stilled, and the pocket watch resumed its ticking, moving past 3:15 a.m. for the first time. The spirits let out a collective sigh of relief, their forms dissolving into wisps of light that vanished into the ether. The oppressive presence lifted, and the room returned to its normal temperature. I collapsed onto the floor, exhausted but relieved. The objects were now ordinary, their dark energies dissipated. The building, once a prison for lost souls, was now free from its malevolent grip. In the aftermath, I spoke with my neighbors, sharing what I had learned and how I had freed the spirits. Some were skeptical, but others felt a sense of peace knowing the truth. The building no longer felt haunted, but a lingering unease remained, a reminder of the dark history that had once pervaded its walls. As for me, I decided to stay. The apartment was no longer a place of fear, but a testament to my strength and resolve. The haunted objects had taught me about the thin veil between the living and the dead, and the power of confronting and understanding the unknown. Yet, an open-ended question lingered in my mind. Were the objects truly cleansed, or had I merely scratched the surface of a deeper, more pervasive darkness? The fate of the other tenants and the true nature of the building's past remained shrouded in mystery, a puzzle that might never be fully solved. But for now, I had found an uneasy truce with the spirits, and that was enough.